Can I grow a lotus plant from seed? Now that is the challenge that I accepted about 6 weeks ago, and today I wanted to give you guys an update on how things are going. So why I started the challenge in the first place, how I went to work, and what the current situation of the plants is right now. So why the lotus? Well, I think the lotus together with the rose is probably the most well-known flower in the world, especially in parts of Asia, of course. It has a strong symbolic and sometimes even a spiritual meaning. It is actually edible, especially grown for its tubers, its roots, again, often used in the Asian cuisine. One of the more interesting facts about the lotus is that although it loves to grow in mud and mucky water, when the leaves and the flower eventually reach the water surface, they come out completely clean, and that's why it's often also a symbol of purity and rebirth. Personally, I think the lotus is one of the most beautiful flowers in the world. I have been inspired by popular culture from a very young age, especially leaning a little bit more towards the fantasy side of things. For example, Magic the Gathering, which is a card game in which the lotus has very strong and magical abilities, and the most well-known and most famous card of all, coincidentally also the most expensive card in the entire world, is called the Black Lotus. So my challenge is to grow a lotus plant, but my ultimate goal is to grow a lotus flower, and a little bit more on that later in the video. Now the lotus is of course a water plant. Although, come to think about it, only the stems remain in the water as the roots grow in the soil and all the leaves and flowers get above water level. Semantics! It loves stagnant or slow-moving water and a muddy, clay-like soil to grow in. Now here in the Netherlands we have an abundance of both of those, as the entire country is basically one big river delta, as 3 of the biggest European rivers end up in our country. And especially where I live, the soil is made up out of heavy, rich clay. So you'd think that the lotus would have an easy time growing over here. However, the difference is temperature. The lotus is a subtropical plant and it thrives in the warmth. And our mild maritime climate is simply too cold for a lotus to consistently grow in a pond at home or even in the wild. Now those of you who are living in the Netherlands might be like, what are you talking about? I see lotuses all the times in ponds and creeks and whatnot. But that is a mistake that is often made by people who are actually looking at water lilies. Now water lilies and lotuses, or lodi, look very similar. They both have big round leaves that sit on top of the surface of the water or even floating above it. And they both have very similar, very beautiful flowers. There is a distinct difference, but I won't go too deep into that. However, water lilies and lotuses are actually part of 2 different families in the kingdom of plants. So, I have done some research and I found out that it is actually possible to grow lotuses and maintain them in the Netherlands, however with some adjustments. I have recorded the entire progress up until this point in a bunch of shorts. I will put a link in the description below the video, but the short story, pun intended, is that I bought a few seeds online of the white lotus, which is a variant of the holy or the sacred lotus, which is a little bit more pink. 5 out of 7 seeds had germinated and I let the seedlings grow in a bowl with some water that I refreshed every once in a while, up until the point that they were big enough to be transplanted into a tub with some soil. So like I've said, temperature is key and the lotus thrives in the warmth. Now I found a tip online that said if you want to grow a lotus in the Netherlands, then make sure that the pond or the tub that you grow your lotus in is warm enough, and to achieve this, make sure it is in full sunlight and that the water level inside of the tub is relatively shallow so that the water warms up fairly quickly. So to increase my chances of success, I divided the seedlings into 3 separate tubs or mini ponds, 2 in this garden, 1 in the garden back at home, and I'm going to give you an update on the current status of all 3 of them, starting with the one right behind me. Alright, so we are in the middle of the garden, and over here we have the very first tub that I filled up with seedlings. Right off the bat you can see some distinct features. First of all, the tub is a little bit dirty, but that's okay. Some of the leaves look really bad. So for example, that one and that one over there, they are half gone. Now those are actually the original leaves of the seedlings, but during transportation they got sunburned. It was a really hot day, and even though I put them in some water,
they didn't really like it and they got scorched. They are still sort of alive, but I think they will perish over time. Now, another thing that you can actually spot over here are on this leaf over here and that leaf over there. You can see some slug trails. And yes, even my lotuses are being attacked by slugs, which is very annoying. I think the slugs will get in there to have a drink, and they find out that there's an edible leaf and they start munching on them. In fact, right over here, now you can't really see it because of the reflection, but there are a few stalks of the lotuses that have completely been munched up by the slugs. Now, another thing you can spot is the difference in color. Some of the leaves are bright green, like that one over there, and some of them are more red or even purplish. I think that has to do with the amount of sunlight, but I'm not really sure. I actually refreshed this water several times. There are some mosquito larvae in there. Some people really see that as a problem. I don't really see it as a problem. It's not going to be a massive breeding ground for a mosquito. I have this little net, if you can call it that, to scoop out some dirt or some mosquito larvae if I can. But like I said, I don't really see it as a very big problem. I know that some people put some guppies or little fish in there to eat up the larvae, but I'm not going to do that because I'm just afraid that the guppies will perish in either the heat or because of the wildlife around here. So I'm not going to do that. And again, I'm not really worried if a few mosquitoes make it out of here alive. One last thing I wanted to mention is the size of the leaves. Over here, this is how the seedlings sort of started off with. They are about, say, 6 centimeters in diameter. But if we go over here, these two are clearly bigger. I'll make another shot from the top so that you can see that. But as the roots of the lotus get stronger, it has more energy to send out bigger leaves. So that is a good sign. Overall, this pool is doing fairly well. And let me take you to the second tub back at home.
All right, here we are at the mini pond back at home. The pond, as far as you can call it a pond, is about 40 centimeters in diameter. It has a single lotus plant in there, and right now it has about 1, 2, 3, 4 healthier leaves and 2 that didn't really make it, and there's another one on its way right over here. Now, I'm not really sure why this one stays a little bit smaller than the other 2. Maybe it has to do with the space that the roots have to grow in, or it's due to the fact that this mini pond warms up more quickly, but it also cools down quicker than the other 2. So it might just be that this one stays warm for just a shorter amount of time. Nevertheless, this small seedling is growing the best it can. You can over here spot beneath the surface some roots sticking out of the mud. That's where some of the leaves are sprouting from, but also the first 2 leaves are actually more buried in the middle. So this one is growing fairly okay. Again, a new leaf on the way, but it's developing a little bit slower and smaller leaves. Now, I did save the best for last, so let's get inside the dome and see what's going on with the last tub. All right, here we are, and right off the bat you can see why this is the most successful one out of the 3. This tub has 2 seedlings in there, much as the other one in the garden. And when I transplanted the seedlings, they started off with, I believe, 7 leaves, and right now we are at 14 with 2 more on the way, so double the amount. You can clearly see there is no color difference in the leaves. All of them are pretty much green. They look very healthy. And another thing you can clearly see is the size difference of the newer leaves, especially this one in the middle over here, which has a diameter of, I think, 12 to 15 centimeters. So the plants are getting well established. They look very happy, very healthy, and I am very happy with the progress that this tub is making so far. So all three tubs are more or less successful, with the one here in the dome being by far the most successful one, and that is probably due to the warmth inside of the dome. So if you are planning to grow a lotus in a relatively mild climate, for example 8B where I am in, then a greenhouse can really help, at least in my opinion. So yes, I can grow a lotus from seed, and the plants haven't died on me yet. So that first goal has been reached. However, like I said, my ultimate goal is to grow a flower. Now, that is probably not going to happen this season. Why is that? Well, the lotus is a perennial plant, and like most perennial plants, it needs some time to establish and to grow a strong root system, so that by next season, it has enough energy to sprout more vigorously and to start producing reproductive parts such as the flowers. So the way that a lotus grows its roots is through rhizomes or tubers, edible tubers in this case. They look a little bit like lobster legs or crustacean-like. Anyway, much like a sweet potato is also a tuber or a rhizome for the plant above the surface. And the function of a tuber or a rhizome is little more than being a storage for energy so that the plant can grow bigger and better the next season, and in my case hopefully that it is strong enough to produce some flowers. So the most important thing for me is that my plants can get as established as possible and grow the strongest roots they can in a single season, so that I can use the rhizomes to replant them next year and hopefully grow stronger and better lotus plants. Now I hear a question coming up. What about winter? Good question. And this is where the adjustment lies when growing lotuses in a mild climate. Now, a lotus can tolerate cold, but they cannot tolerate frost. A well-established lotus plant can survive in a pond if it's deep enough and if it's frost-free, but these tubs of mine will definitely freeze over. So there are two ways that you can sort of overwinter the lotus. One is I'm going to dig out the rhizomes, so the roots, going to clean them and then store them in a Ziploc bag in a fridge to then be replanted in the next season, for example again in a tub. Or you can get rid of most of the water in the tub, cut back all of the dead plants, and then keep the entire tub with soil and the tubers in a frost-free but cold and dark place, such as a cellar or a well-isolated garage. And then you can put the tub back into, for example, a greenhouse or outside when the temperature gets warmer again. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something, and maybe I have even inspired you to grow your own lotus plant next season. If I did, let me know in the comments below. Now, I will keep making updates on the progress of my lotus plants, probably in a short form, but they will also probably be a little bit fewer as the plants are now established, and I'm not really expecting any crazy things to happen bar more or bigger leaves, but nevertheless I will keep making updates. And if you're interested in the whole process before all this, then do watch the shorts that I've made about that. Again, I will put a link in the description below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!